The studio buzzed with anticipation as the live television talk show prepared to begin, the set alive with energy and whispers of curiosity. Whoopi Goldberg, renowned for her sharp wit and fearless humor, took her seat at the center of the stage, adjusting her glasses with a glint of excitement in her eyes. Opposite her, Sylvester Stallone settled into his chair, his broad shoulders squared, his navy blue t-shirt stretching taut against his muscular frame. The cameras zoomed in, capturing the sweat glistening on Stallone's temples and the resolute determination flickering in his eyes. The show's host, brimming with enthusiasm, announced the segment in a booming voice. Tonight's topic: veterans, dog tags, and the stories they tell. The applause roared, the audience clapping eagerly as the camera panned across the sea of expectant faces. Stallone's hand gripped a dog tag hanging from a sturdy chain, its edges dulled and worn, yet it gleamed under the bright studio lights like a relic of an unspoken history. Whoopi's gaze zeroed in on the tag, her lips curling into a sly smile. She leaned forward, her elbows on the table, her fingers steepled as she prepared to provoke. "Tell us, Sylvester," she began, her voice dripping with sarcasm that instantly cut through the air. "What's the real story behind that old trinket?" A hush fell across the studio, an electric tension crackling like static as the audience collectively held their breath. Stallone's jaw clenched, his knuckles white against the chain. But he said nothing, allowing the weight of her question to linger, a silence more commanding than any immediate retort. Whoopi's eyes sparkled mischievously, sensing an opportunity to push further. "Or is it just another prop for your next blockbuster?" she pressed, her laugh ringing out like a shot. The laughter in the crowd was uneasy, a ripple of nervousness mixed with disbelief as some shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Stallone's eyes lowered, his fingers tracing the edges of the dog tag with a reverence that spoke volumes. Memories flitted across his mind like ghosts. Memories of a friend, of promises made, of sacrifice. He shifted slightly in his seat, his usually stoic face revealing a fleeting vulnerability that did not go unnoticed. Whoopi's smile widened as she saw this crack in his armor, her voice growing sharper, almost gleeful. "Come on, Rocky," she prodded, her finger jabbing the air in front of him. "Don't tell us you were just another Hollywood tough guy clinging to a shiny prop." She paused, her laughter fading just enough to let her words slice deeper. "It's just a piece of metal, isn't it? Nothing more." The room was dead silent now, every breath suspended in the air, eyes darting between the two. Stallone took a long, deliberate breath, his grip on the dog tag tightening until his knuckles blanched. He looked up, his gaze sweeping across the audience and landing back on Whoopi with a calm, resolute steadiness that silenced even her most biting laughter. With a slow, deliberate movement, he lifted the dog tag higher, its glint catching the studio lights like a tiny star in his calloused hand. "This," he said, his voice low and even, "isn't a prop. It's a piece of my soul, and a promise I made long ago." The silence that followed was deafening. Whoopi's smile faltered, her bravado suddenly uncertain in the face of Stallone's unwavering conviction. She blinked, her brow furrowing as if searching for the next line, the next joke to diffuse the gravity that had settled over the room like a shroud. But Stallone was not here to entertain laughter tonight. His eyes, steel gray and steady, met hers squarely. "This dog tag belonged to someone who gave everything," he continued, his voice cracking just slightly, a raw edge of grief bleeding through. The camera zoomed in closer, capturing the worn edges of the dog tag, the trembling strength in Stallone's fingers. The audience fell into a reverent hush, leaning forward in their seats, drawn in by the quiet intensity of his words. Whoopi's shoulders slumped slightly, her earlier levity dissolving as she realized the depth of the moment. She shifted uncomfortably, her lips parting as if to apologize, but the words wouldn't come. Stallone's voice grew softer, yet somehow even more commanding. "This tag belonged to a friend, a brother in arms, a man who stood beside me when the world went dark," he said, his eyes glistening. He was the kind of man who never flinched, never wavered. He believed in something bigger than himself, and he paid the price for it. The weight of his words seemed to pull the very air from the room, every listener held captive by the gravity of his story. He paused, drawing a shaky breath, as if pulling the strength to continue from the very tag in his hand. "We made a promise to each other back then," he said, "a promise to remember, to carry each other's memory forward. This tag isn't just a piece of metal. It's a piece of that promise. It's a vow I keep every single day." The camera shifted to the audience. Their faces transformed from polite curiosity to solemn awe. Tears shimmered in the eyes of some, the profound respect for the sacrifice behind that simple metal tag sinking in. Whoopi's hand trembled slightly, her earlier laughter replaced by a deep, abiding silence. She reached out, her fingers brushing his arm in a silent apology, an unspoken acknowledgement of the power of what he held. Stallone straightened in his seat, the weight of years and battles etched in the lines of his face. "You see," he said, his voice stronger now, "this isn't about Hollywood or fame. It's about remembering the people who gave everything so that we could sit here today and speak freely." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the room once more, locking eyes with veterans in the audience who sat with their heads held high, their own memories etched in their eyes. It's about honoring them, even when the cameras stop rolling, even when the world forgets. The finality of his words struck deep. The studio plunged into a respectful, almost reverent quiet. Whoopi, visibly moved, blinked rapidly, her composure cracking as she swallowed back a tide of emotions. I didn't realize," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper, but Stallone only offered her a small, understanding nod. He knew she meant no harm. She simply hadn't seen the weight behind the gleaming metal in his hand. The show's host, sensing the gravity of the moment, chose not to interrupt. He let the silence stretch, let the raw honesty of Stallone's words sink in fully. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft, respectful. "Thank you for sharing that, Sylvester," he said, and the simple sincerity of the words resonated deeply. The applause that followed was not the raucous cheer of celebrity admiration, but the steady, respectful clapping of a room of people moved to their core. The standing ovation rose like a tide, the audience united in a shared sense of gratitude and respect. In that moment, the dog tag was no longer a prop, no longer a target of jest. It was a symbol of sacrifice, of brotherhood, of memories that refused to fade. Whoopi wiped at her eyes, her shoulders slumping as she offered Stallone a quiet nod of respect. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Stallone's shoulders squared, his chin lifting slightly in silent acknowledgement. The cameras captured all, the dog tag glinting like a beacon of remembrance, the faces in the crowd softened with tears and quiet understanding. Stallone's calm strength had cut through the cynicism and left an indelible mark on every heart in the room. As the segment ended and the cameras faded to black, the message was clear. Some symbols carry stories that demand to be told. And some stories, when shared with truth and honor, can silence even the loudest laughter. In that packed studio, a simple piece of metal had united strangers, bridging gaps and reminding everyone of the power of respect. As the applause began to fade, the studio lights dimmed a fraction, the atmosphere shifting from the charged confrontation to a more intimate hush. The air itself seemed to thrum with anticipation as Stallone adjusted his seat, the dog tag still nestled in his powerful hand. His eyes, clouded with memory, stared beyond the cameras, seeing not the bright lights of the studio, but distant memories of dust, sweat, and brotherhood. The audience leaned in as if sensing that what was about to unfold was no longer part of the show, but a window into something real and profound. Whoopi, now quiet and almost deferential, folded her hands in front of her, her earlier jest replaced by a rare seriousness. She watched him, understanding that this was his stage now, and that whatever he was about to share went far deeper than any scripted segment. She simply nodded once, signaling him to continue if he wished. Stallone's voice was low and even, the kind of voice that had recited lines on camera for decades, but now carried something more, an honesty that reached beyond performance. "You see," he began, his gaze still distant, "when I was young and hungry, I had this idea of what it meant to be strong. I thought muscles and toughness were the way to prove yourself. But life has a way of showing you real strength, the kind that doesn't come from the gym or the movies." The audience listened intently, the quiet punctuated only by the faint hum of the lights. Stallone continued, weaving his memories into a tapestry of quiet heroism. "Years ago, before Hollywood, I met a man named Jimmy. He wasn't an actor or a fighter, but he had more courage in his little finger than I ever had in my whole body. He wore that dog tag," he said, lifting the gleaming metal higher, so it caught the light like a silver flame. "Jimmy was a soldier, a man who didn't believe in backing down. And he became my friend when I needed one most." He paused, his eyes softening as he spoke Jimmy's name, and the way he said it, like an invocation, made it clear that this was no story spun for the cameras. "We met when I was just another kid trying to figure out who I was," he continued, his fingers gently tracing the tag. "Jimmy was older, wiser, and he taught me more than any role I've ever played. He taught me about loyalty, about sacrifice, about what it means to put others before yourself." The studio was silent, hanging on every word. Even the faintest shuffles of the audience seats seemed muted, as if the entire room had collectively leaned forward to listen. Stallone's gaze turned inward, his voice growing quieter, more reverent. Jimmy didn't talk much about what he'd seen, but you could see in his eyes the things he'd lived through, the things he carried. He didn't need to brag. He didn't need to prove anything. He just was. He let the words settle, the weight of them filling the room like a prayer. "When I was struggling, when I didn't know if I'd make it in this world of bright lights and bigger-than-life roles, Jimmy was the one who told me to keep going. He said that real toughness wasn't about how hard you could hit or how many people cheered your name. It was about how you could stand up when the world tried to knock you down." Stallone's voice cracked then, just for a moment, the raw emotion catching in his throat. He paused, drawing in a long breath, grounding himself in the memory of his friend. "He wore this tag around his neck every day like it was a shield. And when he passed, far too young, it was given to me. Not because I deserved it, but because he wanted me to remember what he stood for, and to carry that forward." The camera panned to the audience, their expressions a blend of awe and quiet grief. Some clutched their own tokens of memory, military pins, family heirlooms, suddenly more aware of the weight such objects can carry. Whoopi, her eyes glistening, sat back in her chair, her fingers absently tracing the edge of her coffee mug. She had no words now, only the silent understanding of someone witnessing a sacred moment. Stallone's eyes glistened under the studio lights, but he didn't shy away from the emotion. "I kept that promise to Jimmy," he said, his voice growing steadier, the power of memory anchoring him. "Every time I faced something that scared me, whether it was a role I didn't think I could handle or a personal battle that felt too big, I'd touch this tag and remember. I'd remember that it's not about me, not really. It's about the people who came before, the people who gave everything, and the people who keep giving every single day." A soft sniffle echoed from somewhere in the audience, quickly stifled. The air was heavy with empathy and shared reflection. Stallone looked down at the tag in his hand, his thumb brushing across the worn engraving. "I wear it because it reminds me that there are things more important than fame or fortune. It reminds me that courage doesn't always come with a camera rolling. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's just a promise kept in the dark." He looked up, his gaze sweeping the studio one more time. "And I'm not the only one," he said, his voice strong and sure. "Every soldier, every veteran, every person who's ever carried the weight of service, they understand. They don't need applause or awards. They just need to know that someone remembers." The audience erupted into applause, a sound both thunderous and reverent, like a wave crashing on a distant shore. Stallone stood still for a moment, letting the applause wash over him, his eyes misty, but his expression resolute. Whoopi stood too, her hand on his shoulder, a silent show of respect and solidarity. The show's host took a moment to speak, his voice catching slightly as he did. "Sylvester," he said quietly, "thank you for sharing that with us, for reminding us all of what truly matters." Stallone only nodded, his eyes shining with a mixture of sorrow and fierce pride. In that moment, the segment was no longer about a celebrity or a piece of metal. It was about every man and woman who had ever worn a dog tag, every family who had ever waited for a loved one to come home, every soul who had ever carried a memory that would never fade. The dog tag in Stallone's hand became a symbol not just of Jimmy's sacrifice, but of the unbreakable bond of service that spans generations. The cameras captured it all: the tears, the quiet dignity, the unspoken understanding that transcended words. The audience knew they had witnessed something special, something that would stay with them long after the credits rolled. And Stallone, in that moment of vulnerability and strength, had given them a gift far more precious than any blockbuster performance. He had given them the truth. As the applause finally faded and the lights began to brighten, the host signaled that it was time to transition to the next segment. But no one in that room would forget what had just been shared. The story of Jimmy, the weight of the dog tag, and the quiet power of remembering would linger in every heart, a testament to the enduring strength of those who serve. As the final segment of the show loomed, the atmosphere remained hushed and reflective, as if the entire room was still wrapped in the power of Stallone's story. The studio lights seemed softer, the edges of the stage no longer glitzy, but somehow more sacred. Whoopi, her usual levity tempered by newfound respect, leaned forward slightly, her expression open and attentive. She knew there was more to this moment than any carefully crafted script. The cameras might have been rolling, but everyone understood they were now witnessing something that transcended entertainment. The show's host cleared his throat, his tone gentle and considerate. "Sylvester," he said softly, "it's clear that this dog tag carries a piece of your friend's spirit. But it's also clear that his story, and your story, has touched so many people tonight. What do you want us all to remember when we see that tag?" His question hung in the air, both a challenge and an invitation. Stallone's eyes lifted, and for a moment he just held the tag in his palm, as if weighing not just the metal but the decades of memory behind it. "I want people to remember that every small piece of metal like this has a story," he began, his voice low but steady. "Every dog tag carries a name, a life, a promise. We forget that too easily in a world obsessed with headlines and noise." He paused, letting that sink in, his gaze unwavering as it swept the room. These men and women, they didn't sign up for the glory. They didn't wear these tags because they wanted to be heroes. They wore them because they believed in something bigger than themselves. And for some of them, that belief cost everything. His words were slow and deliberate, each one sinking deep into the collective heart of the room. The camera zoomed in on the dog tag, its metal reflecting the studio lights in a way that seemed almost ethereal. "Jimmy taught me that true strength isn't loud," Stallone continued, his voice tightening with emotion. "It's quiet. It's steady. It's the kind of strength that keeps going even when there's no one watching. That's the kind of strength I try to live by every day." The audience sat spellbound, the weight of his words drawing them in. Whoopi swallowed hard, her expression thoughtful and unguarded. She leaned closer, her hand resting gently on the table between them. "It's easy to forget," she said softly, "when we're surrounded by the glitter of Hollywood and the noise of fame. But you've reminded us that some things matter more." Stallone nodded, his eyes bright with a fierce, unwavering light. "I know I'm just an actor," he said quietly. "I know I've made a name playing tough guys on the screen. But nothing I've done in front of camera will ever come close to what Jimmy and men like him did for real. They're the real tough guys. They're the ones who deserve to be remembered." The host glanced around the room, his own voice hushed as he spoke. "Do you think," he asked carefully, "that people outside this room understand that? Do you think they'll remember once the show is over and the lights go down. Stallone didn't hesitate. "I hope so," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "Because if we don't remember, then all of this," he gestured to the studio, to the cameras, to the world outside, "is just empty noise. But if we do, if we take the time to understand what these dog tags stand for, then maybe we can honor the sacrifices that were made for us." His words resonated deeply, a truth that cut through the glitz and glamour to land squarely in the center of every heart in the room. For a moment, the bright lights of the set seemed to fade into the background, replaced by the somber, luminous glow of memory and gratitude. Whoopi, her voice trembling slightly, said, "Thank you, Sylvester. Thank you for showing us what real courage looks like. Not the kind in a script, but the kind that lives in the quiet spaces of the soul." Stallone met her eyes, a soft, grateful smile breaking through his solemn expression. "Thank you for listening," he said simply. "That's all any of us can really do. Listen and remember." As the segment neared its close, the host invited a few veterans from the audience to share their thoughts. One by one, they stood, their voices steady and proud as they spoke of their own memories, their own dog tags. Each voice added another layer to the tapestry of remembrance Stallone had begun. Their words weren't showy or polished, but they were raw and real, and they filled the room with a shared sense of honor and belonging. One veteran, an older man with a deep, weathered voice, stood last. He held up his own dog tag, its surface dulled by time, but no less significant. "I've worn this tag for decades," he said, his voice echoing in the stillness. "And every day, I remember the brothers I lost. We didn't ask for parades. We just wanted to know that someone remembered." The applause that followed was soft but resonant, a collective heartbeat of respect and solidarity. Stallone rose from his seat then, the dog tag in his hand, gleaming one final time in the studio lights. "I'll keep remembering," he promised, his voice strong and unwavering. "I'll keep telling Jimmy's story, and every story like his. Because that's the least any of us can do." As the show wrapped up, the cameras panned out, capturing a room that felt forever changed by the simple act of remembering. The applause rose again, this time not for the celebrity on the stage, but for every name etched into cold metal, every story that refused to be forgotten. When the final credits rolled, the studio lights faded, and the world outside the cameras waited to resume its usual rush. But inside the hearts of those who'd witnessed that moment, something profound remained. The story of a dog tag, the story of a promise, the story of a man who chose to carry a memory so that others might not have to bear the weight alone. And in that silent, powerful space beyond the noise and laughter, the echo of Stallone's words lingered. "It's not about the fame. It's about the promise to remember."